we'll start with Dr. Lukas DANNER. He's a research associate at Florida International University. His field is international relations, and he is affiliated with the Institute of International Affairs at the University of Iceland. Lukas's project is very timely as he is studying Iceland's chairmanship in the Arctic Council, which is of course coming to an end later this month when Russia takes over the chairmanship. Iceland has been focusing on a number of important issues during the last couple of years during its chairmanship. So it'll be very interesting to hear how you evaluate the results, Lukas. So please take the floor.
Sorry, I was muted. Hi, everyone. Let me share my screen and presentation. While I do that, thank you so much, Belinda, for your kind introduction, and happy to jump in for Laura. Let's see. Okay. Can you see the presentation? Yes, okay, great. As Belinda said, this is on my Fulbright NSF Arctic Research Grant project, which is titled Iceland's Second Chairmanship of the Arctic Council, which went from 2019 to 2021. A study of in small states leadership, and she already mentioned my home and host institution. Of course, I want to tell you a little bit about the research topic, give you a little bit of an overview in the time that I have, but like some of the other Fulbrighters, I also wanted to share other things that I did while in Iceland, such as teaching or taking classes and other academic activities. To get to the research topic, not everyone may be familiar with the Arctic Council. This is to introduce you as well to this international organization. It started out in 1991 with the Arctic Environmental Protection Strategy and in the so-called Rovaniemi process. And then the Arctic Council was established in 1996 with the Ottawa Declaration. It's a high-level intergovernmental forum for political and scientific discussions on issues common to the governments of the Arctic region and its inhabitants. And yeah, here sort of, I guess you should emphasize that it's an intergovernmental forum, right? So it would be perhaps misrepresented if you called it an international organization, like the United Nations, because it doesn't actually have a budget. So each project that they have has to be financed on an ad hoc basis. While it does have a secretariat since about a decade, that is financed by Norway, and it's located in northern Norway in Tromsø. The Arctic Council has three sort of main pillars: environmental, social, and economic. And by that, you can already see this is sort of explicitly not military, for example, and the Arctic Council can't enforce anything, right? So it is an intergovernmental forum. Next slide. How is it composed? So it's composed of the Arctic states, or the Arctic 8. So those are the 8 states or territories in the case of Greenland, which are within the Arctic Circle. And in addition to that, there are the permanent participants, observers, and working groups, which I'll introduce in the next slides. The leadership in the Arctic Council, which is what I'm looking at specifically, is via 2-year rotating presidencies with multiple senior Arctic official meetings, and the chairmanship usually ends in a big fireworks with a May ministerial meeting at the end of the presidency. So the presidencies that have so far occurred, as you can imagine, with the Ottawa Declaration, Canada, then was first in line from 97 to 99. Now we're in the second cycle already since 2013. All of them were 2 years, except for the 2006 to 2009 Norwegian presidency, which had some changes to the Arctic Council, and also then introduced the Tromsø Secretariat. So yeah, this is the second chairmanship of Iceland. And the permanent participants refer to the indigenous people in the Arctic. This map is nice because you can see sort of where they are located, and many of these are transnational, right? So if you look at the Inuit, which are in a turquoise teal color here, they range from Alaska, right, which is of course in the US, to the Canadian Northern Territories, Greenland, and even Russia, or the Sami are another example where they are located in Norway, northern Sweden, northern Finland, and the Russian part of the Scandinavian peninsula. The working groups, and as a lot of my co-grantees are natural scientists, right? You probably know more about specific topics that happen in these working groups than me. But yeah, just to point out a few. The Arctic Monitoring and Assessment Program, or AMAP, conservation of the Arctic flora and fauna, which is headquartered in Akureyri, and the Sustainable Development Working Group. Just three examples out of 6 working groups. And there are also task forces and expert groups as well, but the working groups are sort of the main groups where activities take place in the Arctic Council. Observers, there are 3 kind: states, then intergovernmental, interparliamentary organization, and NGOs. And there are many sort of non-Arctic states that observe the Arctic Council activities, both in the working groups, but also senior Arctic official meetings. Then the intergovernmental or interparliamentary organizations, such as the Nordic Council Ministers, or NGOs like the World Wildlife Fund. So a little more background on Arctic states policies. This is taken from Lassi Heinenen's study on Arctic strategies and policies. If I just direct your attention to the Iceland row and columns for the Icelandic strategy, it is based on a 2011 parliamentary resolution on Iceland's Arctic policy. And Belinda probably knows more about this because she used to work in the Icelandic parliament. But you can see that Iceland's Arctic policy, just by looking at this row, is very broad, right? So it has emphases on almost everything, except for the indigenous portion in the second to last column. but that's owing to the fact that Iceland does not have indigenous population. And if you look in the first column on sovereignty and security, only the states really that have territory in the Arctic put an emphasis there on sovereignty, right? And Iceland, while it is within the Arctic Circle, it is not what they call a so-called Arctic littoral state, right? With territory directly adjacent to the Arctic, like Canada would be, or Russia. So it's a very broad policy, right? And in my research grant, research design, and questions, I'm here in Iceland mainly to do data acquisition, right? So I look at media, social media, government and Arctic Council official documents, and hold anonymous interviews with Arctic stakeholders. And so to say, triangulation of sources there. And the questions that I'm interested in it would be how has Iceland set the agenda as the chair of the Arctic Council in those 2 years? How is Iceland as the Arctic Council chair integrated observers and the indigenous into meetings? To what extent has the Icelandic chairmanship advanced Icelandic Arctic policy and well, its own Icelandic Arctic policy? So in a sense, how can the Icelandic Arctic policy be, is it mirrored in the chairmanship as well? And the national interest of Iceland, if you will. And how did Iceland manage the interest between Arctic stakeholders, which of course can be diverging. So in May 2019, we had the last ministerial meeting. That was in a non-pandemic year in Rovaniemi in Finland. And these are often also held in, not maybe in the capital of the Arctic state that is currently the chair, but in a more sort of Arctic city, or city that's closer to the Arctic. So Rovaniemi isn't Helsinki, of course, right? And it's in Lapland. So that would be fitting. And yeah, they have the baton that is given from the Finnish foreign minister to the Icelandic foreign minister. Hence, that's why it's called ministerial meeting, right? Because it's not a senior Arctic official meeting where the senior Arctic official, a SAO, is representing the country, but the minister, right? So it's a higher level meeting that just happens once in the chairmanship. So that means we're, of course, looking at a May 2021 meeting in Reykjavik, hosted by the Icelandic Arctic chair. The 4 priorities, and this is where it comes to agenda setting, that the Icelandic Arctic chairmanship made were Arctic marine environment, climate and green energy solutions, people and communities of the Arctic, and a stronger Arctic Council. So a little bit of a bummer, of course, for the Arctic chairmanship was the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic. Of course, unexpected at the time when they took on this responsibility. There were negatives, of course, but I want to start with the positives. So it was another sort of leadership aspect, right, where Iceland could provide leadership, and the senior Arctic Council, senior Arctic official chair, the ambassador Einar Gunnarsson, in April 2020, then charged the Sustainable Development Working Group and Arctic Council Secretariat with drafting a briefing document for senior Arctic officials on the impact of the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic on the Arctic. That briefing document then was published in June 2020, and Iceland chaired those discussions as well. another sort of side effect, if you will, of the pandemic and the Icelandic chairmanship was that the participation in numbers in meetings of the Arctic Council reached record highs, right? So they were able to do this in virtual modality for about a year or so, with some delay to adjust to it, of course, right when the pandemic happened. But this is a positive, right? This is a plus. On the negative side, of course, Iceland had hoped to host more meetings in person in Iceland, and out of 14 out of the 24 months, this wasn't being possible for Iceland as chair. So that included originally planned working group meetings, SAO plenary, SAO executive meetings, like the Arctic Council meeting that was scheduled in Akureyri in March 2020, Reykjavik September 2020, Egilsstaðir October 2020, Reykjanesbær February 2021, again Akureyri in March. Akureyri, anyways, a big sort of Arctic or an Arctic Council headquarters as well. Not the Arctic Council headquarters, but a lot of Arctic activities are going on there. And the Reykjanesbær in April 2021. So meetings were either then postponed, like the SAO meeting of Akureyri was postponed from March to June 2020, or the Plastics International Symposium from April 2020 to April 2021, about a year of postponing it. Or they were moved entirely to virtual modality. In the case of the May 2021 upcoming ministerial meeting on May 20, so that's in 10 days, it is with reduced attendance, right? So it looked like perhaps it wouldn't be able to be held in person at all, but they were now able to plan it with reduced attendance, with just delegates from the Arctic 8 states and delegates from the permanent participants, so the indigenous. On the sort of having side, there was one senior Arctic official meeting held in November 2019 in Hveragerði, and one working group meeting in early March 2020 in Akureyri. So again, there you see this is sort of a given almost that you wouldn't hold something like this in Keflavik or in Reykjavik, but you know you have the delegates travel a little further inland than to experience the Arctic. Yeah, here, this is what the last senior Arctic official meeting looked like in March 2021, so about 2 months ago. Of course, then online rather than in person and relatively remote locations, right? If they would have held it, you know, like they planned in, for example, Egilsstaðir. So to list some selected major achievements, the Plastics International Symposium in April 2021, to highlight, of course, plastic waste in the Arctic marine environment. The SAO-based marine mechanism, which Iceland held as a first annual in October 2020, of course, with hopes that the Russian Federation would continue that then on an annual basis. The regional action plan on marine litter, again, that is related a little bit to the plastics theme and focus that they set. Then sort of more on the along the line of the priorities related to the Arctic Council. They have initiated a first Arctic Council multi-year strategic plan to sort of look beyond just country chairmanships that are 2 years, but have it be more multi-year. They held individual meetings, 19 of them with observers, so both states, NGOs, organizations, in January 2021. That sort of culminated in the Icelandic chairmanship hosting a separate observer event in April 2021. And they also invited the Arctic Economic Council, which was established during the Canadian chairmanship, second one, to selected Arctic Council events, so more sort of fusion there between Arctic Economic Council and Arctic Council. They also, on the sort of more community and youth priority, they highlighted women in the Arctic Council in an interview series in the Arctic Council website, and had a strong focus on Arctic youth initiatives. On the sort of teaching side, I was privileged to be able to teach a graduate course for the School of Social Sciences at University of Iceland with 13 either MA or diploma students. This was on international political economy from January to May 2021. Today, the research papers are actually due, so I mean, I have a lot of reading to do in the next few days. We held meetings via Zoom, and I also met some students on demand in office hours on campus. This is what their presentations look like of their research. For example, this one is on art and international political economy. Maybe something Sadie would be interested in. Then taking courses, I took Icelandic 1 and Icelandic 3. University of Iceland, some of you might know this, offers free language courses in Icelandic for international faculty, doctoral students and staff. These were taught by Professor Skipstead Volhart, and those were 3-week courses, one in February 2021, one in March 2021. And I met some people, for example, from Bolungarvik, and they all knew Laura Watt, of course, who hopefully was able to join in the meantime. And I passed on their greetings to her. So yeah, it is a big country, but a small country at the same time, of course. And learning some Icelandic definitely helped in navigating everything a little bit better. Other activities, I was able to present 2 papers at International Studies Association 2021. This was planned to be in Las Vegas, but this way I was able to participate, of course, virtually. And that was in the beginning of April 2021. There are 2 upcoming paper presentations, one in the 27th International Conference for Europeanists, which is hosted by University of Iceland, though the decision was to move it virtual, and the 19th Triennial Congress of the Nordic Political Science Association, also hosted by University of Iceland, also decided to be moved virtual, and these are Arctic-related papers as well, of course. And last but not least, thank you so much to Fulbright Iceland for this amazing opportunity, and of course to my host, the Center for Arctic Studies in the Institute of International Affairs at University of Iceland. I look forward to any questions you have.
So now we're going to move back in the program and welcome Dr. Laura Watt, professor at Sonoma State University. Laura is an environmental historian, historical geographer, and she is living in the West Fjords during her Fulbright grant, documenting the environmental history of Árneshreppur and surrounding region of the Strandir coast. She has immersed herself into the local community over the past months, and it's always interesting to get new perspectives We as Icelanders say glögt gestsauga, which means the eye of the visitor tells us much. So Laura, please tell us what you've learned in the past months.
Unmute, yay. All right, so sorry about the craziness. I don't know what happened, but anyway, back online here I am. I'm in Árneshreppur, actually. I'm in Djúpavik and it is snowing, so that is adding a little extra excitement to the scene. If I have a howling cat in the background at various times, please apologies. That's just what we've got. Let me see if I can get to share screen. I know, hang on. Share, except what I want to do is actually get to my presentation, which I'm not sure it's going to let me do. Let's see, slideshow, play from start. There we go. Okay. And will it let me? No, it probably won't. Okay, well, I'm just not going to mess with it. I actually can't see my own notes, so we're just going to hope that I can remember what I was planning on saying. But anyway, so I'm Laura. I'm from originally Sonoma State University in Northern California. I'm being hosted by the University Center of the West Fjords here in the West Fjords. And this is my talk, Wild But Home, Environmental History of Árneshreppur. I am an environmental historian, and I always just like to add this sort of little definition from a colleague of mine, Nancy Langston, to remind us that any ecosystem is the product of its history, and that includes both cultural and ecological forces. And that's really how I kind of frame the work that I do, is trying to understand how the natural and the cultural come together in different landscapes. And this is where I'm studying, the little black circle up in your upper left corner. This is the Strandir, or the whole coast is the Strandir. I'm focusing my work on Árneshreppur, the smallest municipality in Iceland. The registered population at this point is 43. So it is very small. And as one of the reasons I use this map is it shows, I can't remember exactly what website I stole it from, but it shows the major roads of the country in red, and you can notice there are none here. The whole region is accessible by a single dirt road, and it is often not accessible during the winter time, except by snowmobile. This is a photo I just took last week when I was driving in. I'm spending 3 weeks here doing some field work. Ordinarily, I'm back in Ísafjörður. But this is the official entrance with the sign to Árneshreppur, and this is, a very wild and remote region, just to give you a sense of what it's like. And the road, you can see the road there is actually in fairly decent shape. But this picture kind of gives you a sense of just how hair-raising it can be getting in here. Hey, excuse me. Not a howling cat, an interrupting cat. The road in which the cats came with me on, which is very exciting, is a real challenge, and it is one that the Icelandic municipality, the road authority officially does not maintain the road during the winter months. So between December and March or April, it's open when it's open. But if there's snow or if there's a rock fall or something, they do not come in and clear it. So it's got very tenuous connection to the outside world. And a number of years ago, this is sort of the context of why I started being interested in this topic. A number of years ago, a new power plant was proposed. It has not been built, and in fact is on hold at this point. But proposed to build this hydropower plant called Kavala, I can never say it, Kvalarvirkjun, which you can see on the dotted line on the right side of your screen over here. I forgot I have a pointer. That would have been built at the very northern edge of this municipality. It's caused a lot of controversy. It's been a real a flashpoint of conversation about people arguing both for and against it for the last number of years. And at the beginning of the COVID shutdown, the project was officially put on hold. So it's not actually happening or not happening at this point. But one of the things that you can see from this schematic is just how limited the electrical connections are to this part of Iceland. All of the electricity to this region comes in through this single blue line. And I noticed when I got here last week, it's right behind my cottage. So that's the line. You can imagine that this, for the whole region, all the electricity is coming through this one set of poles. You guys know what winter storms are like here. It's a pretty tenuous connection to the world and gets cut off frequently. They also have a lot of power surges, as well as power outages. And the electricity here, as was sort of hinted at in Nick's talk earlier, the electricity here is much more expensive than it is in the more urban areas of the country. So it's a real challenge to people trying to live here. And just, hey, stop howling. One last schematic. This is all the major lines around Iceland in terms of electrical connections, the higher voltage lines, and you can see there are none to this region at all. So this really is the circumstance for this municipality. It's very small. There's this question about sort of how or whether it will develop further in the future, or whether there should be just sort of let it fade away, maybe go the fate of the Strandir up to the north of here, where all the farms and homesteads were abandoned in the 1950s. And it's now an empty landscape in terms of permanent residents. So like I said, this was sort of the context of, hey, stop that. Sorry. This is the context of how I got interested in this project, because in this conversation about whether to develop the hydropower plant or not, or create a national park here, there's a lot of sort of different ideas about what could happen to this region. I kept seeing these sort of arguments about this region being untouched nature, being pristine wilderness, etc. And that is an interesting argument to make, since, of course, this area has been settled since settlement in the 864, just like the rest of the country, and has a very long human history here. So the project that I'm doing is really trying to identify, both through already published sources, through archives, if I can get into them, in terms of under being able to read documents, and just through talking with archaeologists, with folklorists, with all kinds of other experts, to try and better understand the human history in this place that seems very, very natural and very untouched. So that's sort of where I'm going. The reason why I thought I might have something to say about this is it's what the similar issues in California and the American West I've been working on for the last 20 years as a historian. This book came out in 2017, my work at Point Reyes National Seashore, which is just an hour north of San Francisco. Very similar dynamics of a lived in this case, agricultural landscape, and arguments about wilderness and pristineness, and the tension between those. And a lot of battles over land management is the case. And I had actually given this book as just a thank you for your hospitality to the owners of the Hotel Djupavik, where I'm being hosted right now. And it was a few months later that Ava had been reading it, and she said, oh my gosh, this sounds so similar to a lot of the arguments that are happening here about the future of this region. So that gave me the idea to write my Fulbright proposal and try and come here. Let me let the cat out, and then he will stop howling. Dude, you're being really loud. Wow.
Cats are always welcome at our presentations.
Sorry, this is the excitement of rural life. Even the animals get their moments in this sunshine. So this is a local map of Arnarstropur, this small region. And I love this map simply because it has so many indications on it of the area's history, as every single house in the region mapped on it. Houses here have names rather than addresses, so you can sort of identify all the different named farms. Many of these farms go instead to the original settlement of the country. So there's a real deep history here and a lot of indications of sort of what some of the history of this area has been. Like I said, I think it's often hard to remember when we're looking at a landscape like this, that it has human history as well. And so my work is really to understand both basic sort of historical documents, but also looking at the landscape itself and trying to understand the ways in which people and the use of this place has transformed the landscape in some small ways, and also how the landscape itself has transformed the culture that lives here, how they have shaped each other. That's really, in terms of sort of the theoretical side of my work, it's this idea of landscapes being an interaction of people in place that really informs the kinds of things I'm looking at. And I'm a very interdisciplinary scholar. So like I said, I'm looking at everything from biological data, geological data, et cetera, to other stuff, you know, to more traditional historical documents and so on. The West Fjords is interesting in that it is significantly different in some ways than the rest of Iceland, in that, you know, it's colder, which seems odd. It's also drier. I always found it interesting when you're looking at a map of Iceland, you've got all these huge glaciers down on the southeast coast, and then you've got this one up here. And it's actually at a much lower elevation than the other ones. So the temperatures are colder, we get less precipitation and more in the form of snow. And that means it's also been historically much more subject to sea ice than much of the rest of the country has been. That's obviously affected the ability of people to do fishing or other kinds of maritime activity. But also because it is colder, it's much worse area for agriculture. So it doesn't have the same kind of farm-based long history that a lot of the rest of coastal Iceland has. Come on, go this way. There we go. So this is a photograph of current day Gjögr, which is just on the other side of the fjord from where I am now. I put it in just to give a sense of what some of these small communities look like, and also to highlight the unusually large role that fishing has had over a long, not just the last 100 years, but over all the history of this region. There's an archaeologist, Ragnar Edvardsson, who's done a lot of archaeological work in this region, and his estimate from doing some statistical analyses is that agriculture in this area only represented about 20% of any given farm's value, and that fishing and other maritime associated activities was more like 50 to 60% of the value. So fishing's super, super important in this area, always has been, both in terms of nearshore fishing, which would have been for domestic use, mostly just, you know, catching stuff to put in the pot for dinner, but also offshore fishing for export. So mostly catching cod to be transformed into dried fish and then traded to the rest of Iceland or exported to the rest of Europe. Because of that connection, this area has also always had a lot of visitors coming by boat, and had this sort of maritime trading connection that, again, many other parts of Iceland either had much less of or didn't have any at all. Gjögr is important not just because of sort of cod fishing, but also was known as a shark fishery, producing shark oil, which again was a very valuable export commodity. And I threw this photo in just because I found it fascinating that one of the houses there still has their weather vane as a shark over on the right side. So these are the kinds of traces of this long history that I'm really interested in trying to see in the present day landscape, the associations that people have. You also, if you had looked back at the painted map of Arnarstapa that I showed you, there's several sharks on there as well. So it's highlighting the importance of this particular resource in this area. Another unexpected, perhaps, resource, at least to a lot of people who haven't been in this part of the world, is driftwood. Driftwood, again, represents by Edvardson's estimates about 20% of the value, so equal to agriculture for the farms in this region. Most of this driftwood is coming from Siberia, mostly in the forms of cut logs from their forestry operations these days, but also you do get pieces of whole trees and other stuff. The currents in the Arctic Ocean bring it all here, and it piles up on many, although not all, shorelines in this part of the West Fjords in large quantities. So you're always, when you're driving around, seeing these huge piles of driftwood being dried out and sorted, and there's all kinds of rules about who can collect it and what obligations the farms that get a lot of driftwood have to share it with their neighbors. And this area is renowned for the use of driftwood, not only for building the open rowing boats that they fished from, which still amazes me. I'm a sailor back in California, and I'm used to sailing in some difficult waters, but going out in these oceans in an uncovered rowboat just seems crazy to me. Yet these are, tough people that live here. Anyway, using driftwood not only to make the boats themselves, but then also some really elaborate carvings, often polishing the wood using shark skin, again, using the local resources to create these very particular and very distinctive kinds of artifacts and household goods and so on that, again, could be traded. So there's a real long trading history here as well. Just up the coastline from where I'm sitting now is Kuviker, which was the officially sanctioned trade post under Danish rule. And it always strikes me that, now it looks like it's just a summer house. There's a little cottage there, and there's a family that comes, but very few people even around here seem to know it's many centuries history as a trading post. So these are the kinds of things I'm looking at. Of course, they're in this area even with the driftwood resource, wood is at a premium. So you have a lot of sod houses, just like in the rest of Iceland. There's a ton of remnants of these around the landscape. But one of the things I've noticed is that unless people are sort of primed to be thinking about this as a lived in landscape, they may see the remnants, but they kind of don't see them. They don't process them as archaeological remains. So that even some people that I know who know this area very well and have visited many times, when I said, oh, I was looking at the old walls just down the road, and they're like, what? They've never noticed them before. Because again, if you're thinking of this place as an unlived in pristine nature, you kind of edit these kinds of indications out of your framework, and you just focus on the waterfall or the cliffs. Other kinds of traces of people in the landscape. This is a photo there's a big waterfall just behind the factory here. I'm staying in this little red house right now, so that's where I am. But you can see on the landscape behind down on the landscape, there are these drainage channels for trying to make some of these fields into pastures for sheep. So they need to get some of the excess water off the landscape. Coming from fire burnt California these days, this is a wonderful place to be where there's too much water. But so I'm really intrigued by a lot of the ways in which the history of this as a worked landscape is literally written into the landscape. But again, only if you're sort of paying attention to those kinds of clues. And lastly, that giant building that's down there is part of, again, why I'm centered on this location. I think, I'm going to skip past a couple of slides here because I don't have my notes, and I think I'm running short of time. Djupavik itself is the location of one of the earliest big jumps in Iceland into the modern era, which is the building of this huge herring. It was built in 1935. At the time, it was the largest concrete building in Iceland. It was one of the largest in all of Europe. And it's here in this strange place. The materials to build it were all brought in by boat, and the whole thing was constructed by hand. It is an astonishingly enormous structure, and really brought what had been subsistence life for the most part. Like I said, they did have connections with trading, but there wasn't a lot of an economic system here. Suddenly brought this realm into the modern world. So here's the factory when it was first built. You can see there's an enormous pile of coal over here on the side to run the boilers that would operate this whole system. This building is the original piece, the original building that this cottage has been cut down from. So that's where I'm sitting. What the process would be that boats would be fishing for herring offshore. They'd bring their catch in. The catch would be sorted by women workers here on the dock. They worked uncovered all summer long, regardless of the weather. And like I said, it's snowing right now, so the weather can vary enormously. The women would sort the fish. The ones that were of higher quality would be salted in these barrels and sold as fresh fish, essentially. And the ones that were of lesser quality would go into the factory, be pressed for their oil, and then the remainder sort of cooked and dried and made into fish meal. So all of the parts of the fish were being sold in one way or another and processed through this enormous facility. I have a hard time imagining how this must have transformed life for the people who live here. They were suddenly working for wages when they never had before. There was this opportunity to participate in a more a new kind of economy, essentially, to the region. And in the documents that I've seen, the men who created the factory and were running it, the managers and so forth, keep commenting on how wonderful the workers are, how incredibly eager and enthusiastic they are. There's now a museum here in the factory, and there's often old timers who did work here who come back to visit, even in their 70s and 80s. And universally, when they tell the stories of their time here, even though it's incredibly hard work in very difficult conditions, they talk about it as the best time of their lives. So there's sort of an energy around the work they were doing here that I find really fascinating. And I'm hoping to learn more about, who are these people? How did they, this was always a low population area. So did they only come from the local region? Did they come from further away? Sort of how did this community get built here around this factory? These are some women who are working in the factory or in the bakery on their day off, I hope. So this place, like I said, huge investment in the factory. It actually was paid off in only 2 years. It shows you how profitable herring fishing was at the time. But as is been the story for the rest of the sort of herring adventure sites around the north and northwest of Iceland, the herring didn't last. They were probably a combination of overfished, but also they simply migrated away. Herring do not have stable territories that they stay in. They'll move around with different climatic conditions, different temperatures of the water, and different currents. So they were here for a while and then they left. And so the factory operated from 1935 until 1954 and then closed down for good. And the population has been shrinking ever since. Until here at the factory, at least, these two crazy people, this is the wintertime population of the entire municipality, Eva and Aussie. And they, I still don't quite understand why, but they bought the factory back in 1985 when it had been abandoned for 30 years and decided I think they were originally going to try to start a fish farming enterprise here, but that proved unworkable. And they ended up turning the women's barracks that used to house all the women who worked here into a hotel, and have done all kinds of stabilization work on the factory and turned a portion of it into a museum. This is the little sign outside the museum. And it's become, again, something of a hub. I'm really intrigued by how the When the factory was first built, it became this hub for the area, bringing it into, like I said, the modern era. And now the hotel here has become sort of a secondary hub again, where when people are driving through, they'll stop and look at the museum. There's often art exhibits here. They'll just stop and get a cup of coffee or use the restroom. There have been movie crews that have come and filmed here. So there's sort of a new, this is not the only economic activity in the region, but again, has become something of a hub of bringing people into the region and bringing some new economic value to it as well. So I think that's, like I said, I didn't put a timer on, so I'm not sure where I am with time. But it's an amazing place to visit. I highly encourage everyone to come north and check it out. And I'm, because I started in January, I'm here until August, so I'm partway through my work and looking forward to learning more about this area and hopefully sharing more about it soon.